This is Somewhere in the Skies with Ryan Sprague.
Hey guys, Ryan Sprague here from Somewhere in the Skies, and welcome to a very special live stream tonight here, where I'm going to be reading a very interesting chapter from my book, Somewhere in the Skies. So before we get to that, just want to say hello to everyone in the chat. Hi, Esmeralda. Hello, Alien Girl. Thank you so much for being here. Um, yeah, so this is going to be cool. This was one of the most interesting chapters and one of the most talked about chapters from my book, both editions actually, the 2016 edition and the 2020 edition. I forgot which year the second volume was published, but yeah, this is going to be just kind of like a read along. I'm going to read the chapter. I've got some visuals to show you guys as well with that. But before we do that, I did want to share some exciting news. If you haven't been to your local grocery store or Barnes and Noble or convenience store, this magazine that came out, I believe it's from Life magazine, called Aliens, Why You Should Believe. Right in the towards the end of it, they had this really cool thing about which podcasts you should listen to that have to do with UFOs, and you'll notice a very interesting one right there. We got Somewhere in the Skies, we got UFO Chronicles, we got Hysteria 51, we've got Alien Theorists Theorizing, we've got Unknown, the podcast. So yeah, really cool write-up in this magazine. So if you haven't already, be sure to try to find this in your local stores. I don't know if it's just in the US, but yeah, I thought that was pretty cool. A listener of the show happened to just be in an airport and sent me a photo. So I immediately went out and grabbed a copy. So yeah, check that out if you can. Um, if you guys have any questions tonight while I'm reading this chapter, I'm going to kind of read it and give some commentary along the way from it as well. This should be pretty fun. I think we could use that in the world right now. So thank you. Thank you for everyone who's hopped in tonight. Hello, A51 Watcher. Hello, Hillary. Hello. We've got Metal Hendrix, Jason. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. So I have a cool slideshow I'm going to set up for you guys here. Let me make sure I do this right. So yeah, tonight we are going to be hearing chapter 14 from my book, My Weekend in the Woods with UFO Abductees. And this was an interesting one. I had the opportunity during the research for my book to join a group of individuals who have claimed to have been experiencers or abducted by aliens. And they were going to get together, kind of like a support group, and talk about their experiences. And I was very honored to have been invited as the non-experiencer to come and kind of just hear the stories and hear how these people interact with one another and how those conversations go for my research for the book. So I thought it would be pretty cool. Hello to BN. I appreciate you guys being here. And once again, guys, the super chat and the super stickers are open if you do want to support Somewhere in the Skies tonight. That is greatly, greatly appreciated. You can also click that join button right under the video as well, where you get exclusive content right here on YouTube from us. And yeah, any support is greatly, greatly appreciated for the show. All the money goes right back into the show and helps it to continue and grow. So thank you. Thank you for any and all support. Oh, wow. Thank you so much. Booth Beagle. Really appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you. Props on great content. I really do appreciate that. Hello to Asheville, BN. Welcome, everyone. So I guess, without further ado, guys, we're going to hop into it. Like I mentioned, this chapter comes from my book, Somewhere in the Skies, which is available in paperback, ebook, and audiobook on Amazon, on Barnes and Noble, or you can order it straight through our publisher as well, Beyond the Fray Publishing. So be sure to check them out and all their amazing books that are out there. What does BN say here? Nice, boo. Awesome. So let's just dive into it, guys. This is the chapter from my book called My Weekend in the Woods with UFO Abductees. It was late March of 2015. Winter had officially turned to spring, but you wouldn't be able to tell from the frigid temperatures plaguing the East Coast. Jane and I rode the train upstate from New York City to Saranac Lake, a beautiful town tucked snugly into the Adirondack Mountains. We'd been craving a weekend away from the city for months now, having suffered a very harsh winter and didn't seem to be letting up anytime soon. As the train chugged its way out of Manhattan, the ride gradually became a sight to behold. Endless stretches of frozen lakes and snow-filled pine trees surrounded us like a Colorado winter. We'd been invited by a close friend and colleague, Mike Cleland, to join him and a few others for a weekend of rest, relaxation, and friendly conversation. Mike had recently moved from the Rockies to New York State, taking up residence in a cozy bed and breakfast run by his partner, Andrea. And this was that bed and breakfast. I'll do a little commentary as well while we're doing this, guys. This place is really cool, tucked really snugly in the woods. Absolutely loved it. Where was I? Let's see. While with skiing and hiking season winding down, the town truly served up the dead silence we had yearned for. The bed and breakfast, appropriately named the Doctor's Inn, had once housed many physicians who treated tuberculosis patients at a nearby sanatorium. Now, the sanatorium sat vacant, its iron gate rusted open, and its many buildings rotting away from years of abandonment. This was going to be an interesting stay, indeed. The Doctor's Inn, experiencing its slowest time of the year, would fill its current vacancies with our company. Greeting us upon arrival was Spazzy, a cream colored feline with stunning black eyes. She timidly welcomed us with nudges and barely audible purrs. Welcoming us in the category of humans would be Lee, an energetic Brit who flew in from London. A bit closer to home, Rachel, a young woman from the suburbs of New Jersey, also joined us. Andrea, with a warm smile, took our coats and made us feel like we just walked into a family gathering. Besides Jane and me, everyone in the house had met at an event in Portland, Maine in September of 2014. The event was called Experiencers Speak, and it included about a dozen individuals from around the world speaking about their experiences. Mike had met Andrea at this event, and a romance blossomed almost immediately. Rachel, hesitant to attend this particular event after her friend dropped out, mustered the courage to drive north by herself and attend. There, she met the other three individuals who now stood before us. Lee, claiming no direct experiences with UFOs or alien presences, had always been fascinated by the topic and had impulsively attended the main event. Give me a break here, guys. I just need to get a little drink. If you're just joining us, guys, I'm reading a chapter from my book called My Weekend in the Woods with UFO Abductees. I hope you guys are enjoying this so far. BN says, we get photos. Awesome. Place looks spooky, Hillary says. It was a little spooky, I'm not going to lie. The abandoned tuberculosis ward around us was a little bit more spooky, to be completely honest. But we'll get to the spooky stuff in a little bit, Hillary. I promise. All right. Oh, BN asks UFO Jane. No, actually, BN. With me was my partner in life, Jane, whose name is Jane as well. She came with me on this trip. God bless her. God bless her for coming with me. We arrived just as dinner was being prepared. I was immediately put on preparation duty for the food. Mike wanted me to peel and mince garlic, something I had never done before. Having just bragged about making dinner for Jane a few nights prior, Mike jokingly scoffed at my ineptitude. I laughed, a sense of ease rushing over me. Knowing I was in the house of experiencers was rather intimidating, but not knowing how to mince garlic in front of a seasoned cook was definitely a modest crush to my ego. As I continued following Mike's instructions, I began I began to realize that I wasn't an outsider observing these individuals as subjects for a book. I was here as a friend and to eat home cooked meals, something rare in my daily routine of living in New York City. Everything else would have to wait. As I watched Mike prepare a bowl of spices, I began to remember when I had first met him a few years prior. Although we'd previously communicated online several times, we'd yet to converse face to face. That all changed in 2016 in Phoenix, Arizona. When we met at the International UFO Congress, the largest UFO conference in North America. We'd spend the next week running into one another and having impromptu conversations lasting late into the night. Throughout those conversations, Mike's highly viewed blog, Hidden Experience, would come up many times. I'd spend many sleepless nights poring over this blog, and it was rewarding to finally put a face to the words. Mike was a lifelong experiencer who chronicled events in great detail on Hidden Experience. He would introduce the blog on the homepage of his website as such. Quote, "This was a time when I was swallowed up in a sort of existential crisis. The blog originally started as a way for me to try and make sense of some weird personal experiences. I did it as a kind of sociological experiment. I wanted to wrestle with some challenging memories in a very public forum. But as time went on, I started adding other content, things I found interesting or relevant to the core topics." End quote. The sociological experiment was indeed working, as hundreds of new readers began visiting the blog every week, and other experiencers came forward to tell their own stories. Mike had opened the doors for many individuals and even found connections to others that would aid him in his personal journey to also find answers. One of the first entries I'd come across was an event that happened to Mike when he was 12 years old. The year was 1974, and he was living in a quiet suburb of Detroit, Michigan. After attending a football game at the local high school, he and a friend made the leisurely half-mile trek home by foot, taking in the pleasant autumn air. Mike would say, "We were in front of a house where an elementary school friend lived at the time. And just as they passed the house, a sudden flash of orange light lit up the entire sky." Quote, "It was bold and jarring," he remembered. "It felt like someone just flipped a switch and the sky lit up and then went back to normal. As soon as it happened, it was gone. It was completely silent. We were surprised and both responded with, 'What just happened?'" Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the chat, everyone. If you're just joining us, I'm reading a chapter from my book, Somewhere in the Skies. We're getting to the good stuff. Mike and his friend parted ways, still shaken by the sudden flash of light. When he finally made it home, Mike noticed something even stranger. Quote, "I was excited to get home and watch a television show I really loved that started at 10 p.m. I remember having left the football game in order to get home in plenty of time so I could watch the show. But just as Mike entered his home, his parents were waiting for him, upset. Mike, assuming he had arrived home around 9:30 p.m., was shocked when his parents told him it was now 11 p.m. Where had the last hour and a half gone? It was as if the time had been completely stripped from his memory. When Mike returned to school the following Monday, he sat with a group of friends in the cafeteria. They huddled around him as he began to explain the strange burst of light he had witnessed. His friend, who shared the experience, chimed in eagerly as he joined the group. "It was a UFO with lights and everything," the friend said. Mike sat confused. He thought to himself, "I didn't see anything with lights. Did he see something I hadn't?" Mike replayed that bright flash in his mind. The smoldering colors burned into his memory, but no UFO. Feeling almost a sense of jealousy that he hadn't witnessed a solid object, Mike remained quiet, the event shimmering in his mind for many years to follow. Could a UFO, as his friend had described, been responsible for the apparent missing time Mike had experienced as he stepped foot into his home that night? This would be one of the first major events Mike experienced, but it most certainly was not the last. All right, we'll keep going in a minute here, guys. Oh, it's so dry in my apartment. I apologize. Thank you for joining us tonight, guys. If you're just hopping in, I'm reading a chapter from my book, Somewhere in the Skies, A Human Approach to the UFO Phenomenon. You can find it in paperback, ebook, and audiobook on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or at beyondthefraypublishing.com. Esmeralda says, missing time. How classic. Yes, very classic. Very, very classic. Guys, if you do want to help the show out tonight, you can either support us through our Patreon campaign, which the link is below, or the Super Chat. Super stickers are open as well. If you want to help the show out, every bit goes back into the show, making it continue and grow. So thank you. Thank you for all of your support. All right, let's get back to the book. Let's see where we left off. It most certainly was not Mike's last experience. So I thought maybe after dinner we'd all sit by the fire and share some stories. Mike had snapped me back into real time here, placing a few items of food in the oven. My mind returned to the kitchen, the smell of fresh spices hitting me. A burst of laughter from the living room filled the cabin. Things were turning light as Lee entered the kitchen, having hit the punchline of a joke Mike and I had clearly missed out on. He prepared English tea for everyone. He handed us both a cup, heading back into the living room to entertain an attentive crowd. I could faintly hear Jane in the other room, her warm, familiar laugh assuring me she was opening up to this group of people. Months earlier, she had agreed to be the editor for my book. I had read several sociological papers she'd written and was impressed with her attention to detail, expansive insight, and solid grasp of grammar. This, besides her unconditional support, compelled me to invite her to this weekend getaway with Mike and the group. Being very interested in the UFO topic, Jane was also curious what the aftermath held for those who'd had experiences. So it made perfect sense to invite her along, not only as my partner, but to glimpse into the everyday lives of these seemingly normal people with extraordinary experiences. As Mike moved a heaping pile of noodles from colander to pot, I could see Spazzy creeping her head around the corner of the dining room. There's Spazzy. That's Spazzy, the actual cat. Oh, she was so cute. Her nose and eyes shot up, looking at me with a sense of urgency. The activity in the house was clearly more than she was used to. She stayed in the doorway, her deep orbital eyes bouncing my reflection back at me. I stared at her for a moment, those eyes reminding me of another experience Mike once detailed in his blog. It was February of 1993. Mike was now 31 years old and living in rural Maine. As he lay in bed that winter evening, a bright light began to illuminate his bedroom window. This wasn't that uncommon for the mere fact that a motion sensor light had been set up to catch any sudden movement approaching the house. The most common culprits were cars passing by or the occasional deer wandering off the beaten path. Mike, fully aware of the extreme sensitivity of the motion light, did not think much of it. But as he propped himself up and looked out the window, it was clear that this wasn't the sensor light, and it most definitely wasn't deer. Backlit by a small unknown light source, 5 small figures stood on top of the snow, walking toward the house. These figures, in Mike's own words, were, quote, spindly entities that had very skinny bodies and big black eyes, end quote. The entities drew closer. One would assume that in this situation he might hop out of bed, attempt to call for help, or even approach the possible threat. But his actual response surprised even Mike. Quote, I nonchalantly laid my head down on the pillow and promptly fell back asleep. I felt absolutely empty of emotion. End quote. It was almost as if Mike been somehow controlled. Like, oh yes, they're here. Let's just shut down and black him out. So while his first experiences were undoubtedly steeped in reality, Mike struggled for some time with this memory of 1993 and the entities on the lawn. According to him, it all could have just been a dream, but one that seemed all too real. Mike would say, quote, I saw something, but at the same time, I truly do not know if it happened in this reality. That may sound hard to grasp, but it is the only way I can honestly depict the experience, end quote. This sense of a dreamlike state was eerily similar to many other stories I had heard in researching my book. Mike would awake the next morning remembering the experience vividly, but unable to shake the feeling that whatever had happened, it was leading down a road that he couldn't seem to navigate logically. Hillary says, too bad he didn't have security cameras. Yeah, right? Could you imagine if we got those 5 grays on camera? Ugh. I don't know what to make of this, guys. This is a little aside. Um, this idea of like seeing them and then being like, okay, go back to bed. I've heard this in many other stories as well. People who saw UFOs and had some sort of almost like, I don't know, switch flipped in them or something. I don't know. Very, very odd. Anyways, let's get back to it here. Let's see. Oh, here we go. Once again, Mike broke me out of this daze of remembering his stories from his blog. He would say to me, quote, maybe tomorrow you and Jane can head down to Lake Placid. We'll give you the car. I snapped back to my current reality, a delicious aroma in the room hitting me all at once. Dinner was almost ready. I smiled and nodded, seeing Spazzy's tail sweep along the doorframe as she disappeared from sight. Mike headed into the dining room to help set up the table. I trailed behind for a moment, now noticing the bright glare of the ceiling light shining down on me. I stared into it, remembering one of the most intriguing of Mike's experiences to date. Mind control, Esmeralda says. Yeah, it's possible. Very, very possible. Here's Mike's next experience. It was May of 2010. Mike was now living in Idaho. A close friend of his, Natasha, flew in from Germany to explore the beautiful canyons and sandstone of the surrounding areas in Colorado. In Colorado. Is that right? Oh, yes, I read that wrong. Excuse me, guys. Mike was living in Colorado. There we go. He would meet up with her to join in on a 2-week camping trip. Late into the trip, the brakes on Mike's car began to give out. Fearing danger, they would find themselves in an auto repair shop in the small town of Cortez. They learned that it would be a few days before the proper parts could be shipped. This prompted Mike and Natasha to spend the night camping in a nearby town of Dolores. Quote, we chose a secluded spot with an old fire ring and some broken beer bottles. Perfect for our camping needs, Mike recalled in his blog. They pitched their tent, crawled into their sleeping bags, and soon drifted off to sleep. It was the dead of night that Mike was abruptly awakened by a harsh shriek coming from Natasha. Quote, my instantaneous response was to bolt upright and scream with an intensity that would be hard to describe. I was screaming in fear, sure enough, but it was also a primal outburst of defense, end quote. Mike switched on the headlamp above him, immediately asking Natasha what had happened. She couldn't respond, frozen in an upright position. Tell me the first thing that comes to mind. Sorry, I've lost my spot, guys. Tell me the first thing that comes to your mind. Don't think, just tell me what happened, Mike said to her. She looked at him, wide-eyed, and answered with trepidation. Natasha told him, I saw a face. Panic welled in him. What Mike said next was completely unlike him. Look, If we need to, we can just leave right now. We can leave the tent, set up, and just drive to town and get a hotel." Natasha looked at Mike, desperation following her words. "Do you believe in evil ghosts?" she asked. "No," Mike responded, more out of an urge to comfort than sheer honesty. He moved a bit closer, putting an arm around her. They lay in the tent, their breathing slowly returning to normal. "I ended up chanting a repetitive mantra in my head," Mike remembered. "Love and light, love and light, love and light." Their close proximity to one another was all they had as they both finally fell asleep, hoping that the night would soon be over. But it wasn't. "Late that same night, I had a vivid dream," Mike explained. "It took place inside the same tent with no dreamlike distortion. It was curiously void of any emotion, good or bad. What Mike saw in the dream would leave him completely at odds with what was real and what wasn't. Quote, I saw a big round mandala figure up to my left, situated in a very specific point in the tent. It was a simple circle about the size of a large pizza with a lone dot on its center. As Mike took stock of what he was seeing, something strange began to happen. Quote, I was floating up off the floor of the tent. The elevator up sensation of slowly rising. I thought to myself, I need to remember this. I need to remember this. As the sensation of floating upward continued, Mike recalled something else rather vivid about the dream. Quote, the environment of the tent changed to a backdrop of white light. I thought, am I on a table? I didn't understand where I was. It was mysterious, some weird realm with a uniform white glow around me. The dream abruptly ended when Mike heard Natasha's voice. She nonchalantly remarked, Mike, you are floating. Though the words were clear, whether she had said this in reality or merely in the dream was another point of contention in Mike's recollection. No matter the case, those words seemed to pull Mike back down to the ground, both in the dream and in the tent. Upon waking up the next morning, Mike and Natasha immediately began to try to make sense of what had just occurred. Quote, I saw a face within a circle, Natasha told Mike. The circle, she went on to explain, was strikingly similar to the mandala image Mike had seen in the dream. This was very curious, Mike commented. She didn't know about my dream yet. I asked where the face was positioned. At the time, I assumed it was directly over her, centered above her face. But Natasha broke that assumption, pointing up and off to her left in the tent. It was exactly where I saw the glowing circle in my dream, Mike explained. The two would spend the morning discussing the entire event, trying to make sense of it all. What might have actually happened is very difficult to say, Mike told me. I cannot dismiss the immense fear that overcame both of us. This feeling of terror was entirely different than any emotion I had ever experienced, amplified in a way that seems extraordinary. The nature of Mike's dream, vivid in ways he couldn't fully put into words, was strikingly similar to Natasha's reaction when she saw the face in the tent. Pure terror. All right. Take a little water break here, guys. I hope you're enjoying this. Let me know in the comments. Mark, thanks so much for being here, man. Thanks for the super sticker. Really, really appreciate that. What do we got next? All right. All right. Here we go, guys. Dinner's ready, Mike proclaimed to us all. We took our seats at the table. The rest of the group joined us. We opened a bottle of wine, passed around various plates of food, and drifted in and out of one another's various conversations. I couldn't help but veer my attention toward Rachel. She'd been noticeably quiet the entire night, and my curiosity got the best of me. I impulsively interrupted the conversation. Rachel, would you be comfortable sharing your experience with us? I asked. She sighed and finally spoke. "The first experience I can remember was when I was a child," she said. For the next half hour, Rachel opened up to us about her startling experiences. While not being able to record or take notes in that moment, I asked her to convey these experiences through email correspondence a few weeks later. She bravely agreed. Like many young children, Rachel found herself afraid of the dark. She would often sleep on the floor of her parents' bedroom. They didn't mind much, knowing that she would outgrow the fear. But it was in the wake of her first experience that that fear would not only remain, but intensify. It was in the middle of the night when she awoke, her heart pounding. She sensed something in the room. She could faintly see something peeking out from the side of her father's dresser. As she lay on the floor, she could feel something lightly tugging at her legs. Frozen with terror, she soon blacked out. She awoke in the morning, assuming it was all some horrible nightmare that would fade. But whatever it was that she saw, sorry, but whatever it was she saw and felt was making an extremely uncomfortable home within her dreams and in the cold, hard reality of her life. Rachel would tell us, on another occasion, while sleeping in the same room, I had an episode of paralysis where I was struggling to get a grip on it. I could sense something in the room again and tried desperately to get my parents' attention to no avail. Rachel awoke the next morning and confronted her father in a fit of anger, wondering why he hadn't done anything if he'd heard her panicking from this apparent reoccurring nightmare. He told her that he didn't do anything because he was afraid. Quote, I was shocked, she remembered feeling. I couldn't believe he said that. And I certainly couldn't even wrap my head around my father telling me he was afraid of anything, let alone acknowledging that what was happening was real. Whatever that reality was, it was deeply affecting Rachel in ways she was yet to fully understand. Was this merely a spell of sleep paralysis, night terrors? She struggled with these notions. At that point, she says, I think I was still trying to explain it away as dreams, really bad dreams. You try so hard to hold on to the idea of this and of it all not being real, chalking it up to having some serious phobias. Thinking you're crazy is almost more comforting than believing there are aliens in a house at night. The thought that an unknown and possibly non human intelligence was visiting her in the night was something she wrestled with on a daily basis. Would this be the night it would happen again? Would she be helpless against its intrusion? Unfortunately for Rachel, things only seemed to escalate. Quote, it was in my preteen years that I would wake up with twigs and leaves in my bed sheets, she explained, though she had no recollection of ever leaving or being outside. Quote, my father once accused me of sneaking out at night. I thought that it was completely ridiculous, being that I couldn't even look out of the windows to see if it was dark at night. It was in these years that the visits in both her parents' room and her own seemed to be most frequent. She would wake from the paralyzing feeling time and time again. These bouts with what she believed to be sleep paralysis left her suffering extreme insomnia, afraid that there was much more to the experiences than met the eye. Quote, I would try to stay up all night reading and usually fall asleep when the sun came up. Honestly, I don't know how I functioned. As time progressed, Rachel tirelessly fought with the mysterious presence that creeped in and out of her life. She would try so hard to ignore it, but it seemed to always thrive on the periphery, almost begging to be seen. One night, she woke up to the tail end of a bright white light consuming the room. She felt like she was floating above her own body. The white light lingered for just a moment longer and then blinked out completely. Snippets of small figures would pass by her vision for years to come, which turned the fear somewhat normal, but never completely manageable. Rachel was now 30 and living in the outskirts of New Jersey. It was a farming community, she remembered, with a lot of open space. I lived on the side of an interstate, which gives me completely false sense of security. I hear the cars and trucks passing by at night, and am comforted by the noise. End quote. Although the ambient noise comforted her when she slept, it didn't stop the experiences from occurring. Quote, I have woken up to what I thought was a shoulder turning into the wall in the bedroom. It was a brownish gray. Rachel continued with another experience. Quote, another time, I woke up on the couch in a very dreamy, sleepy like state, with one of my cats being shoved into my face so I couldn't see around her. What I saw was the very top of a hairless head. That's it. I can't remember if I was awake from that point or if I woke up again. Ooh, these are so creepy. I gotta get some water, guys. If you're just joining us, guys, I'm reading from my book, Somewhere in the Skies, A Human Approach to the UFO Phenomenon. This is a chapter titled My Weekend in the Woods with UFO Abductees. Let's get back to Rachel. Oh, and also Super Chat and Super Stickers are open, guys. If you want to help out the show tonight, all contributions go back to making the show bigger and better for you. So we really do appreciate that here at Somewhere in the Skies. All right. Perhaps one of the most disturbing experiences that Rachel recalled was when she was lying in bed one night and could sense something underneath her bed. Quote, I could feel a pair of hands reach out from underneath me, and then having the hands inside my body, moving my organs around. End quote. When I asked Rachel why she felt this was occurring, she stated, quote, I believe they wanted to get something from me. End quote. What that was, Rachel was not entirely sure. She also felt an extreme sense of fear before each experience. Quote, it's like a wall of force that is pushing against you as you're pushing back to remain with it, when all you want to do is just fucking rail against it and lose your shit. End quote. Whatever was happening to Rachel, it was clear that it was severely affecting her everyday life. The constant feeling of something just around the corner or in the dark watching her, its motives ominously unclear, would make anyone feel at least a bit paranoid. Even worse was not knowing exactly what it was or what it wanted. All she knew was that it was hiding in the night, waiting for its moment to sneak into her dreams and possibly into her reality. Whatever this truly was, one thing was clear. Rachel was scared, and that fear was slowly eating away at her. And as we sat at the table that night and listened to her tell her story, tears began to run down her cheeks, a slight tremble in her hand as her fingernails tapped the tabletop. I looked at Mike, whose gaze was so intent on Rachel that it was clear he too had known these feelings of fear and helplessness before. We all sat in silence with nods of gratitude to Rachel for sharing. Esmeralda says this is so entertaining. Thank you. Trying. It's the actor coming out in me. The long day of traveling and the flood of stories being shared was taking its toll on my tired mind. We moved to the living room, drinking tea around the fireplace, making lighter conversation to cap the night off. Jane and I found ourselves saying goodnight and soon heading to bed. I awoke to the sound of tapping. It almost sounded identical to that of Rachel's fingernails on the dining room table. But this was behind me. Glass. This was the room that Jane and I stayed in, guys. So you'll see that window, those two windows actually in the corner there. The larger bed, that's where we were sleeping in this room in the cabin. Yes, it wasn't a cabin, it was more of a bed and breakfast, an inn, the doctor's inn. So at night, those all of those curtains were drawn completely shut. just so you know, for what's about to come. On the window, let's see, glass on the window in a room. We were on the second floor of the house, though. What could possibly be tapping? A tree branch? A heavy snowfall? Whatever it was, it awoke me abruptly. I glanced over at Jane, who was usually a light sleeper. But in this moment of sheer panic that I couldn't fully describe, I watched her sleep deeper than I'd ever seen before. My eyes shot to the window, and as I tried to sit up, something stopped me from looking out the window. I felt paralyzed with fear. My eyes moved to the closed door of the bedroom. A shadow moved past the faint light that poured in from underneath. Something was definitely behind the door. "Jane," I inquired in a whimper. No answer. I looked under the door again. The light remained, but no bouncing shadows. The tapping creeped in again on the window. I had listened to the stories from Mike, Rachel, and so many others, yet I'd always shied away from the possibility that anything like what they had experienced could happen to Jane and me. But as I sat straight up in that bed, staring into the darkness, my mind began to swirl with what could be outside that window. I could feel sweat dripping from my brow. I felt alone in the universe, everything closing in on me. Whatever was outside that window, I knew that by facing it, I'd never be the same. Water break. How is this, guys? Do you like this? Hope I'm an okay storyteller. Finally, I gathered a shred of courage, battling with the possibility that by pulling the curtain aside and looking beyond the glass, I might stare into the eyes of something I didn't want to accept. Perhaps it would be an extension of a dome shaped craft or a triangular formation. Perhaps a swirling ball of energy, or worse, it could be the fingertips of a being or a pale gray of some sort, its black eyes staring back at me. Whatever it was, I wanted to know. I needed to know for my own sake and perhaps even my own sanity. It was in that moment that a small part of me felt a deep connection to Rachel, that fear of the unknown. Whatever lurked in the shadows didn't care what I felt or how I'd react. It would just happen, and I'd have no control over it. My sweaty palm moved toward the curtain and slowly pulled it aside. I peered hesitantly through the window. Nothing. A sense of relief flooded over me. I let out an audible sigh which woke Jane up, finally. She turned toward me and whispered, "Is everything okay?" I didn't know how to answer. I let the curtain fall and sat silent. Was I okay? Was this all a figment of my imagination? All I knew was that I'd never felt such intense fear in my life. I simply nodded to Jane, rolled on my side away from the window, and stared at her as she fell back asleep. I longed for that state and tried with all my might to fall asleep, awaiting the bright morning ahead more than ever before. It was around 3 a.m. that I finally drifted off. We awoke the next morning to a fantastic breakfast. As I sipped my morning coffee, I saw Spazzy peeking out from beyond a potted plant. Her eyes were as deep as the night before, though she looked at me with comfort. She clearly had warmed up to us as guests, and my severe allergies to cats seemed to stay at bay for the time being. A pair of keys suddenly hit the table next to me. Mike made good on his promise, letting us borrow his car for the afternoon. He suggested we head to Lake Placid, once home to the 1980 Winter Olympics. I graciously accepted the offer, wanting to shake whatever had happened in the bedroom the night before with some local sightseeing. Jane and I arrived at Lake Placid to an array of local shops boasting hot chocolate, maple fudge, and cider donuts. We absorbed the beautiful landscape around us as young children skated and played hockey on the frozen water. Jane spotted a truck that held several snow dogs in its bed. I watched her beam as she tried to pet them. I felt a warmth from her excitement, both something deep down in the pit of my stomach wouldn't let the fear of the previous night fully subside. I kept getting flashes of something outside the window and the shadows moving under the door. We headed toward the lake as I pushed the thoughts further back into my mind. We found ourselves walking straight onto the water, a flurry of soft snow brushing past us in every direction. It brought me back to the many winters growing up in Syracuse, New York, where snowfall would often reach my chest. It also brought back memories of more innocent times in my life, as I caught sight of the children sliding across the ice with their used and tattered hockey sticks. I felt a huge sense of gratitude and fortune for friends like Mike, Andrea, Rachel, and Lee. Not only had Mike and Andrea given us the car for the day, but they had invited us into their home to hear their stories. It was in that moment when the darkness of the night before began to dissipate once and for all. As I watched Jane climb a large mountain of snow that had collected on the ice, I felt a calming sensation rush over me. And that's when I realized that whatever was outside the window that night no longer had a hold on me. Day slowly turned to night as we headed back to the doctor's inn for dinner with a special guest. Tom, a close friend of Mike and Andrea, joined our group. Tom, as we learned, was from a nearby area known as Tupper Lake. There was also something rather unique about him. He was a practicing shaman. Having never met a shaman in person, I wasn't exactly sure what to expect, but I can honestly say that Tom wasn't it. He had the grizzled yet well groomed look of a professional woodsman, topped off with a healthy white beard and tattoos wrapped intricately around his forearms. He reminded me more of a biker than a spiritual practitioner who used altered states of consciousness to interact with the spirit world. But the weekend had surely opened my mind already, and I wasn't going to let it stop now. Oh, thanks, guys. Appreciate the very kind words. Just as with the night prior, conversations ran the gamut. As Lee, Jane, and I listened intently to Tom explain his work as a shaman, I could see a troubled look on Rachel's face. She appeared tired. When prompted, she admitted to us that she had a really tough time falling asleep the night before, sensing that the beings were still visiting her, even on this weekend retreat. That is when she asked Tom something I'd heard many other experiencers ask. How do I stop these experiences from happening? And we'll get his answer in just a sec. I felt it inappropriate to record Tom's answers that night. Rachel's emotional and vulnerable state was palpable, and it was clear that this moment was for her and her alone. But I contacted Tom several weeks later to ask him what he recalled from that night, and to again relate the vital information he had imparted to all of us. I asked Tom about what he believed was happening to Rachel, according to her descriptions of the beings she witnessed and the fearful experiences she continued to endure. He stated the following on the beings. Quote, in my opinion, the aliens are entities from other worlds, sharing the shamanic worlds with us. I think the shamanic worlds are possibly community property, accessed by several different physically manifested energies. It's not uncommon to encounter other life forms in the shamanic worlds. It's a richly inhabited environment, so crossing paths with, quote, aliens has a high probability. Thanks so much, Meadow Hendrix. Appreciate the super chat. Dude, these pictures and these stories to take this to another level. I'm hooked. I'm glad to experience this live. Great job. Thank you. Really, really appreciate that. But what did Tom believe was the true nature of these specific beings that Rachel briefly encountered? What about their presence scared her so much? Tom would tell me, quote, all of us have guides around us, working for our good and observing our lives. The guides interact with people open to seeing them, but they also interact with people only partially open to them. This makes for interesting interactions. If a guide gets insistent with guidance, if it refuses to not be seen and continues to be a presence impossible to ignore, the consciousness will frame it in something familiar when expressing it. If we are fearful at the time, then the expression will probably be fearful in its interpretation. I feel Rachel's guides are trying to get her attention over something important to her, and they keep coming back because they have failed to deliver that message. End quote. What this message was, Rachel was not quite sure, as it never seemed to come through in a way that she could comprehend or accept. Was it, as Tom had mentioned, clouded by the immense fear the experiences often harbored? Tom explained why this is so often the case with many who have had experiences like Rachel's. Quote, my thoughts on abductions is that some, not all, but certainly some, are people slipping into shamanic journeys without training, unaware they are journeying. They find themselves in a place unfamiliar, and the consciousness of the individual tries to frame the new experience into familiar forms such as nightmares or abductions. Walking shamanic worlds without any training can be daunting and scary. Fear does strange things to us, and we often respond with fear when things are unknown. That's not unknown, that's an ambulance. Sorry about that, guys. The entities one sees in the shamanic worlds are rarely in human form. What one runs across is often bizarre or strange looking to us. Rather than find out what the entity wants or is, we draw away and awake with a fear filled experience of an alien. And while Tom's observations may or may not have shed some glimmering light on what Rachel had been dealing with, it didn't fully put her at ease. It only opened the door to more questions. How does one keep a level head and begin to alleviate this constant fear? Tom's response to this question struck me most, and by the look on Rachel's face that night, it seemed like it had reached her as well. Tom would say, all experiences are different, and all solutions are different. Some people come ready to let go of the event, while others have it so immersed in their being that it becomes a part of their identity, a feeling that by letting it go, they will lose themselves. Every instance will have emotions attached to it, raw and fresh, easily feeling like it will overpower the individual. We think we have a finite ability to embrace emotions, but the reality is that we have the ability to embrace emotions far deeper than we usually do. Fear holds us back. In that feeling lies our humanity and our reason to be here. These experiences are opportunities for each of us to move into a new way of being, one with little or no fear, and with a level of emotional depth few could imagine for themselves. It's a place of our own true power. Esmeralda says, okay, now I am a fan and must get the book. Thank you. I hope you'll check it out, Esmeralda. Plenty of more stories like this. All right, back to reading. There was a distinct moment when I could visibly see a rush of relief overtake Rachel as she sighed and wiped tears away. The thought that she could potentially have control over these experiences gave her hope. It would be condescending to suggest that she hadn't sought different ways to try to deal with her experiences. But Tom's words only solidified her progression in knowing that not only was she not alone, but she could focus on the positives in her life rather than dwelling on the fear that these beings would return. She would tell me, quote, "I will continue to try to focus on me and my soul's journey. Maybe over time, I'll have more insight into this and the reason. But really, I'd be happy if they just left me alone. I hope to fill my life with happiness and surround myself with positive people on a level that these fear inducing beings can't touch." End quote. As our final and most emotional dinner concluded that night, I found myself battling with my heavy eyelids, hesitant to go to sleep. Whatever had happened the night before had clearly affected me on a visceral level. The very thought of encountering something similar to what Rachel, Mike, or so many others had seen was almost too terrifying to consider. Reluctantly, I wished everyone a good night and headed upstairs to bed. Jane, who had retired early, was already fast asleep as I crawled into bed. The window suddenly caught my eye, and my heart began to pound. As I lay there, I began to think about Tom's message. No matter what was behind the glass of that window, I had complete control over what it was and what it made me feel. If it wanted to give me a message, it was up to me to let that happen. I opened the curtain wide and stared out, the faint sound of wind and snow hitting the glass. I stared and stared and stared. Nothing seemed to be happening. I turned in bed to face Jane, watching the moonlight hit her in the most brilliant way. She slept peacefully, a faint smile on her face. An immediate rush of comfort and happiness consumed me. And no matter what was or wasn't out there in the dark, it couldn't compete with the light I felt in that moment. I had controlled the fear, and I knew that deep down, Rachel was beginning to do the same. That night, I slept more soundly than I had in a very, very long time. We said goodbye to Lee and Rachel early the next morning as they made the long trek back to New Jersey. Lee would be spending a few days in New York City, so we knew full well it wouldn't be the last time we'd see him. As for Rachel, I didn't know when I'd ever see her again. But through her experiences, she taught me that no matter the level of intensity of an experience, it was possible to move on with one's life. This was something I wished for her more than anything. We arrived at the train station just in time. Andrea and Mike hugged us goodbye. It had been a weekend of laughs, crying, and everything in between. What Mike had done by bringing us all together was something truly special. It was a weekend of sharing without any prompting, pressure, or presumptions, and it had certainly changed all of us in many ways. It was the beginning of friendships and the strengthening of others. And as we pulled out of the train station, I knew that whatever the message was that these phenomena were trying to convey, it was getting much louder the more I engaged in the lives of those having these experiences. And perhaps I was engaging more openly with the phenomena as well. And that's it, guys. That is the chapter My Weekend in the Woods with UFO Abductees. I hope you enjoyed that. It was fun. I gotta say, that was pretty fun getting to share that with you guys. You know, obviously the book goes into a lot more detail with a lot of stuff, but I thought that was one of the most personal chapters of the book where I actually was like embedded into the lives of these people that I would eventually write about. So this was quite a memorable experience for me. I can't thank Mike enough, if you're watching this, Mike, for allowing me to be a part of this experience. I was deeply honored. It is something I will never forget. I will never forget the stories you all told me, and I hold them close to my heart. And whatever has happened to you and Rachel and Andrea and everyone else that has ever had a UFO abduction experience, I just wish you comfort and closure of some sort. Um, Coping with these things, and knowing that there are people like me out there willing to listen and to hear you out and to try to help you find answers. I can't pretend I'm going to find those answers, but I can at least tell your story and preserve it. So, yeah, that's kind of what I learned from these experiences. Anything can happen. And I almost found myself in the shoes of an experiencer that night. Whatever happened or didn't happen, I can't tell you, but it stuck with me. And I will never know what was beyond the window that night, if there was anything, but I didn't let the fear overcome me by the end of the trip. And I think that's what is most important, is not letting fear run our lives, especially right now. So yeah. That's about it, guys. That's all I've got for tonight. So unless you have any questions you want to throw in the chat there, super sticker, super chat are open. I'd be more than happy to answer some of those. But yeah, this was first of what might be many others. I'll share more chapters from the book if you do like this sort of stuff. Yeah, it was delightful. Thank you, Esmeralda. Hillary said, loved it. BN, thank you, thank you. I appreciate that, guys. A51 Watcher says, another great job, Ryan. No wonder your sub count is getting so big. That's very kind of you. Yeah, we're almost up to, I think it's 8K subscribers. So yeah, guys, if you're not subscribed to the channel, please do that right now. Make sure you click the like button as well. Share this video with anyone you think might find it interesting. I would certainly appreciate all of that. And let's see if we can get to 8K soon, for sure. Let's see. A51 says, I made a video about alien abductions. You can see it on my channel. Feel free to comment. Oh, yeah, that's cool. A51, put your channel, link us to it in the chat there if you don't mind. Would really appreciate that. Would love to check it out. BN says, do you believe that window tapping was an actual ET experience? I don't know. I mean, let me go back actually um, to the image of the house, because if you look to the right of the house, those two windows to the right, that was our room. Those are the windows to our room. And as you can see, there's no trees in front of it or anything. It was not like hailing or really even snowing heavily that night. So I honestly couldn't tell you what was tapping on the window. Maybe a bird, maybe an owl. Mike Cleland is known as the owl guy, who has written several books now on the connection between UFO abductions and owls, and sort of the symbolism that they have within UFO culture and history. So I don't know. I honestly don't know, BN. I don't know what was tapping out there, but it scared the crap out of me. But by the end, I did not let it scare me. So yeah, please do this more, Esmeralda says. I will. I will. Um, how do I? There we go. A51 says it's my username on YouTube. Awesome, guys. Go check out A51 Watcher's channel for that alien abduction vid. Let's see. Hillary says, "Oh wow, that's even creepier. I assumed you were on the first floor." No, no, we were up a floor. So I don't know what the hell could have been tapping on that window, or what was under the door frame. That freaked me out even more. I asked everyone the next morning, like, was anyone up at night, like going through the hallways? And I was like, no, we were all in bed. And I was like, oh, could it have been Spazzy? Could it have been Spazzy the cat? And Mike was like, no, Spazzy stays in our room. And we shut our door every night because we don't want her like wandering while there's guests and stuff. So ugh, I don't know. I don't know. That's what I get for going to a weekend retreat with a bunch of alien abductees. Oh man. Yeah, it was an interesting weekend to say the least. And I always struggle too. Like, did these stories I heard prior to that window tapping and everything influence me in some way? Possibly. I can't tell you, but it was an intense fear like I'd never felt before. So yeah. Ugh, gosh. Scares me right now. Dopeness says thanks. Awesome. All right, guys. Well, I think I'm gonna call it a night. We hit the hour mark, and this was a lot of fun. So I want to thank you for joining me tonight for this very special live stream. Again, please tell your friends about the channel, and make sure you liked the video. Make sure you're subscribed. Click on notifications, or what do they say? Ring that bell so you know when we come out with new videos. And yeah, try to stay happy. Try to stay positive out there. We need that right now. And yeah, I really appreciate your time tonight and for joining me and spending your night with me here at Somewhere in the Sky. So if that's it, no more questions in the chat. No, I'm gonna call it a night, guys. If you want to listen to the podcast, it's available wherever you get podcasts. Our latest episode was about all the scientific discoveries in space exploration going on right now that Christopher Plain, the head science writer at the Debrief, has been writing about. Some really cool stories, some new discoveries of a new planet within Proxima Centauri and a new exoplanet, very similar to Tatooine, the famous planet from Star Wars. And also a story about how we might be extraterrestrial to our own planet. Yeah, so it was an exciting episode. I hope you'll check it out. It's in the archives right now. That's it. Hillary says, thanks, Ryan. Thanks for the nightmare fuel. You're very welcome, Hillary. You're very, very welcome. Go take your CBD gummy and calm down for the night. That's gonna be it, guys. So again, from my heart to yours, thank you so much for joining me tonight. And I will leave you, as always, with our slogan here at Somewhere in the Skies: keep your feet on the ground, but never stop searching somewhere in the skies. Have a great night. Take care. Keep looking up. Hey guys, Ryan here. The Somewhere in the Skies podcast is a labor of love every week. And with that comes many different costs to keep the show running. That's where our Patreon campaign comes in. You give what you think the show is worth. There's different rewards available all the time, including shoutouts on the show, early editions of main episodes, bonus episodes and content, and very soon, monthly patron hangouts, where we sit back and chat all things UFOs. So I hope you'll consider becoming a Patreon subscriber today. To learn more and to join, visit patreon.com/somewhereskies. Thank you for your support and keep looking up.